Welcome everybody to the next edition of Ecclesia on Zoom, and we're welcoming the Rabbi Sam Rose today to share two of the Jewish tradition's high holidays of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. And let me just say, do I say it correctly? Shana Tova? Is that how you pronounce it?
That's right.
So Happy New Year to you, Shana Tova.
Thank you. Shana Tova. So you said there's a Yiddishized pronunciation which accents the first syllable of Hebrew words, and then the Hebrew pronunciation accents usually the last syllable. So Shana Tova is Yiddish, Shana Tova is Hebrew.
Shana Tova, I like that.
There you go. Yeah.
Since we had the story of you singing, are you going to sing us in or sing us out or in the middle or something? We got to have something.
I don't know how good it'll sound right now. I've literally, over the last 2 days, I've sang for about 10 hours.
Oh,
I can, what's a good...
Even if it's Led Zeppelin,
I was thinking of
Nagila, maybe. Maybe Hava Nagila.
Hava Nagila. So I'll sing one of the melodies. So one of the themes of the high holidays is obviously thinking about our relationship with God, and one of the pieces of hold on one second. One of the ideas, and there's within Jewish tradition, there are very few things that are considered to be the right way of thinking about something, and there are lots of ideas that kind of exist on a spectrum, and how human beings are able to kind of wrap their heads around God is one of those things that exists on a pretty broad spectrum. And so during the high holidays, we're balancing a tension between thinking of God as a parent, and thinking of God as being like sovereign of the universe. And actually, so how many of you have apples with you? I know that was one of the things that I said. So there's actually a fairly complicated reason for why apples became a symbolic food for Rosh Hashanah. And it deals in part with this issue of finding balance. So again, if we think of God as being sovereign of the universe, that kind of image is associated with a pretty hard line idea of justice, and that there's a line in the prayer book that we say for both Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, that if we lived in a world that was limited to divine justice, no human being could survive, because we all make mistakes such that that with strict divine justice, just the world would cease to be. And so we balance that with divine, what's called rachamim, which means compassion, and or mercy. And so divine mercy tempers divine judgment in a way that allows for the survival of humanity, and also allows us to participate in this process of soul searching. Another really important idea for that people are supposed to do during this time of year is something called a cheshbon hanefesh. And cheshbon hanefesh literally means a soul accounting. So we do some literal soul searching and figuring out, looking back at our feelings and our behavior from the previous year, and work to do something which is called teshuva. And teshuva literally means to turn, and it is a turning both to look back and remember all the things that we've done throughout the year, both good and bad, and figuring out how we can improve ourselves for the year ahead. So, but so there's, let's see, so there is, I was looking something up real quick. So there's a pretty simple melody that I'm trying to find real quick. So come on. So I mean, how many of y'all have heard Barbara Streisand sing a song called Avinu Malkeinu? Okay, so I sing that song every year. I can't do it right now because it wouldn't sound very good. My voice is shot, but I sang it twice over the last 2 days, and it is the piece that people like come to services for. But the last line of that prayer is Avinu Malkeinu Chanenu Va'anenu Ki Ein Banu Ma'asim Aseh Imanu Tzedaka V'Chesed V'Hoshienu, which I was trying to. It's easy. It's way easier for me to translate something if I actually see it, as opposed to just kind of saying it, and that's what I was looking for. Hold on a second. I know where I can find it. What am I doing? I'm looking in the wrong spot. But Avinu means parent or father. It specifically means father. So obviously, well, for many, many generations, Judaism has been a very patriarchal religion. And within the last probably 50 years or so, the Reform movement specifically has done a lot of work to try and take gender identity away from God. So most of the language surrounding God in our prayer book has been, instead of saying Lord or He, we use the Eternal One, or kind of gender neutral language. But when you're using a phrase like Avinu Malkeinu, the literal meaning is father and king, and so you can't entirely take it away. Hebrew is a gendered language, just like Spanish or where's my Kindle app? Okay. I have too many books.
You sound like me.
Where are you? Here's one. Okay. This is Rosh Hashanah. The problem is the version, well, anyway. Sorry. I should have prepared this a little better. I thought about thinking about a song that I wanted to sing beforehand, but I didn't actually do it.
A little busy.
Yeah. All right, here. That's a different Avinu. Where is actually, hold on, Gates of Repentance. It'll be easier for me to find there. There we are. Okay. It's morning service. All right, I know where we are. Okay. I have to get before the Torah service. So we also, here it is. So Avinu Malkeinu, Chanenu Vanenu, our Father, our King, Chanenu. So Chen is the Hebrew word that means grace. So be gracious to us and answer us. Va'anenu. So the ana is to answer. Ki ein banu ma'asim, because we have little merit, or like we are not worthy to be standing before you. Asei imanu tzedaka v'chesed v'hoshienu. Please act generously and kind with us and be our help. So that's the conclusion of that particular prayer. So I'm gonna sing a folk tune, so it's not super complicated, of that melody. Avinu Malkeinu, Chonenu Vanenu. Avinu Malkeinu, Chonenu Vanenu, Ki ein banu ma'asim. Aseh imanu tzedakah v'chesed. Aseh imanu tzedakah v'chesed v'hoshienu. Avinu malkeinu, chanenu v'aneinu. Avinu malkeinu, chanenu v'aneinu, ki ein banu ma'asim.
Thank you.
There you go.
It was so
Yeah.
beautiful. The next time
Thank
that you have a prayer at goal, would you sing your prayer?
I could in theory, yeah. That's funny. Yeah, yeah, there are a few things that would fit doing with goal. Yeah. So, well, I guess what do y'all have questions about the high holidays, or are there things that you're curious about? I could take this in a million different directions. I could tell well, I know Michelle asked me to share stories kind of related to my personal journey around the high holidays. So I have my shofar. So have y'all seen one of these before? This actually is a ram's horn. Shofar really just means horn, and it comes from an animal. It doesn't have to be a ram, although most of the time people think about a shofar, they think about a ram's horn. But there are also these really long, like ibex horns, and I've seen shofar made from a variety of different animal horns. I got this shofar because I was I guess you could say that I was as a 12-year-old compelled by my grandfather to do something that I was uncomfortable doing. So I've been able to blow one of these for a very long time. My grandfather taught me how to blow a shofar when I was like 6 or 7. My daughter can do it now, or at least she's like figuring it out. She's 6. So I had been doing it for a while, and every year at my synagogue, there was a man, I can't remember his name now, but he was the person who was what is called a Baal Tikiyah, the person who, that's their job, is to blow the shofar. And he didn't show up one year. Like we got all the way to the shofar service, and the shofar was sitting on the lectern of the bima, of the pulpit, and it came time to blow the shofar, and he was not there. And so my rabbi, when I was a kid, who could not sing or blow a shofar, we had a choir as a kid, and a person who served as soloist for the congregation, and again, someone who was supposed to blow the shofar, and that person was not there. And so my rabbi basically looked into the congregation and said, "Is there anyone who can help me with this?" And my grandfather and my mother said, and so I can tell you, as a child, I was incredibly shy. I hated speaking or doing anything in front of people, and I still am not a huge fan of it, but I do it because I've gotten used to it. And so they kind of like pushed me up onto the bima, and I did it. I was very nervous. My legs probably were shaking out of my pants, and I did. So there are 4 formal calls that you would do for a shofar. So the first one's called Tekiah, and Tekiah just means blast. And then the second call is what's called a shivarim, and shivarim means broken. And so a shivarim is a tekiah that's broken up into 3 pieces. And then teruah means like a siren. So it is 9 like really shrill, like short sounds at least 9. You can do more than 9, but you have to do at least 9. And then a tekiah gedolah is just a big tekiah. So do you want to hear it? I don't know. Hopefully I won't blow out anyone's speakers. I'm gonna back up a little bit. So a tekiah is just this. I love you too, Ellie. So that's a tekiah. Shavarim is it's 3 pieces. And then teruah is the 9 broken up ones. Okay. Y'all need to close the door, please. Okay, you can listen and then you have to close the door. And then a tekiah gedolah is some people do it as long as they can hold their breath for. I have to say that I am not in the best shape of my life to be doing this, but when I was in high school, I used to run 2 miles, I used to run 12 miles a day and swim 2 miles a day, and I could hold my breath for 4 minutes. So anyway, this is not going to be that. There you go. I love you too. Now close the door. Okay. Hug. All right. I love you. I love you. Oh, I love you.
Like being in church.
Yeah.
Wow, that was impressive.
Thank you. All that proves is I'm full of hot air. This is what I.
So you mentioned that your rabbi, when you were growing up,
Yes.
did not know how, and then obviously you didn't know how when you got up to do it the first time. Does it take a certain way of forcing the air in there, or what is?
So it's very similar to a trumpet. You put your mouth. You don't actually put your mouth over it. You have to it's like you press your lips against it.
Okay.
And if you do this and go put 2 fingers in front of your mouth and try and blow air in between the 2 fingers, like you're buzzing, or if you play trumpet, that's how you blow it.
Okay. Interesting.
Yep. Yeah. So yeah, no, I mean, I remember when I was so my grandfather is he's not my biological grandfather. He was my grandmother. When my grandfather, I'm actually named after my mom's father. He passed away in 1971, so before I was born. And my grandmother, I guess a few years later, met a man who was a Holocaust survivor who became my grandfather. And he taught me how to blow the shofar. And I remember even in kindergarten when I was 5, bringing in a shofar for show and tell. And I was already at that point as a 5-year-old able to make noise in one of these. So it's not, if you know what you're doing, it's not tricky, because I mean everyone can blow air between their fingers. It's just making sure that you can do it and I will also say every shofar's mouthpiece is different, because it's from an animal, and so they carve a little hole and I love you too, Ellie. Please let me teach, or maybe let me talk to this group. Thank you.
I love it.
She's 3.
Oh.
So, oh my gosh. So they're so noisy. I have a 3-year-old and an almost 7-year-old. The 3-year-old just turned 3. Anyway, so this shofar was the shofar that was on the bima when I did it for the first time, and then when I left for college, my rabbi gave this to me, and so my brothers both kind of inherited my job once I left. So my middle brother did it for 2 or 3 more years, and then my youngest brother did it for the next 4 or 5 years, and actually, sadly, my home congregation doesn't exist anymore. They were victims of some bad leadership for a few years, who kind of unfortunately drove away the majority of members from the congregation. And so but basically up until that happened, my youngest brother, blew the shofar for Rosh Hashanah. So
That's cool.
yeah. I was trying to think of other interesting things that have kind of like been a part of my personal journey around the high holidays. But really, I mean, so singing in the choir that's how I like became really interested in like vocal music and the shofar. So I guess my real like personal connection to the holidays are like through music. But um, there's some cool things that even if you went to high holiday service here, you wouldn't really get like the kind of experience that you would if you went to Israel. So living in Israel for 2 years, I got to see it a couple of times. But so Rosh Hashanah means Jewish New Year, or it means New Year. Shana Tova means have a good year, and but it's Rosh Hashanah in and of itself is kind of a complicated, not just day, but like the whole concept is complicated. So it's not so in the Torah, in the Bible, where like the holidays, there is like a liturgical calendar written in the Torah. There's no holiday in the Torah called Rosh Hashanah. That doesn't exist. So Rosh Hashanah in the Torah is called Yom Teruah, like the day of blasts. And it's also called Yom HaZikaron, which means day of remembrance. And so there's lots of conversations about like what that actually means. Like why is it called a day of blasts and day of remembrance? And if it was supposed to be the new year, why is that? And if it's supposed to be the new year, why does the new year take place on the first day of the 7th month of the year? Like, so we call this Rosh Hashanah, and it's technically the 7th month of the calendar. So the month of Tishrei is the 7th month. All of the Hebrew months, by the way, are not actually Hebrew words. They actually were adopted from ancient Persia. So the ancient Persian calendar was influential for the creation of the ancient Hebrew calendar. So before there was a written Hebrew calendar, the rabbis kind of had a system that relied on sight. So you would have people literally like following the cycles of the moon with their vision, and if they could report the correct day, then they would. And it wasn't until around 2,000 years ago where the rabbis decided that they needed to codify something. So if, God forbid, future generations would be dealing with like issues of not being able to see the moon or whatever else, that people would still be able to keep track of when the holidays are. So that's also the reason why Rosh Hashanah has 2 days for people who don't live in Israel. Because a part of the ancient Jewish calendrical system before it was codified and written down was literally a process of announcing a holiday from the center of the Jewish world, which at the time was Jerusalem. And so they would literally send fire signals from mountain to mountain, like way out into the other centers of the Jewish world. And it sometimes would take days to get there. And so you would celebrate the holiday when you got the signal. And so if the signal, if you were receiving the signal in ancient Baghdad, which was the second source or center of the Jewish world, for about 900 years, Baghdad in Iraq was the center of the Jewish world. Then you needed that confirmation, and so outside of the land of Israel, Rosh Hashanah is still celebrated for 2 days. They codified it in the calendar, even though we don't need smoke signals anymore. That's true also for most other kind of major Jewish holidays. Outside of the land of Israel, it's 2 days. Yom Kippur is only 1 day because it's a fast day. So on Yom Kippur, it's a 5-fold fast. So there are 5 things that we're not supposed to do. The first and most obvious is we're not supposed to eat for 25 hours. If there's a medical reason for eating, obviously that there are exceptions. But so you don't eat, you don't partake in marital relations, you don't take a bath, you don't wear comfortable shoes, eating, drinking, marital relations, cleaning, and really the prohibition is against wearing leather. So you're not supposed to wear leather because, but it's written kind of as an idiom as like comfortable shoes, because comfortable shoes are leather shoes, because you don't want to have basically like death on you in the day when we're like praying for life.
What shoes do you wear?
Usually like Toms or something that are all cloth. Yeah, I have my Yom Kippur Toms. um, so yeah, which I just brought out to make sure I still have them because we are living in a temporary. We're living in an apartment right now. My house is being renovated amongst all the other crazy things that are going on in my life. So yes, so I have my Yom Kippur Toms in the apartment. um, but yeah, so Yom Kippur is always only one day. But in Israel, it is a day. So on a regular Shabbat, so Shabbat means to stop. So people like to talk about Shabbat as being the day of rest, but Shabbat really just means to like take a break, to stop. And so on a regular Shabbat in Israel, there are things that people don't do because otherwise you wouldn't be stopping. But it's still like you'll still see people. Some people will drive on Shabbat. People will do things that like are traditionally maybe not identified with keeping Shabbat, but it's not the whole country. There's a pretty distinct divide between like religious and secular Jews in Israel. And there's also the Arab, Christian, and Muslim populations in Israel, and they obviously don't observe Shabbat, at least not in the same way as Jews do. And so, like on a regular Shabbat, like there's still activity happening, but Yom Kippur, basically the whole country shuts down. Nobody's driving except for emergency vehicles. And even emergency vehicles, if they're not being like summoned for an emergency, if they're on the highway patrolling, they don't put their feet on the gas. They're just kind of coasting. And so kids in Israel call Yom Kippur Yom Ofanayim, which means day of bicycles. Because all the roads, including all the highways, are completely empty except for these slowly traveling emergency vehicles. And so kids love to just ride up and down the street on their bicycles for Yom Kippur. Another really cool thing that happens on Yom Kippur in Israel that you wouldn't ever really see here. So one of the main objectives of these holidays, again, is to like begin thinking about what it means to repair relationships. And so there is an ancient ritual that happens today, although I'm sure for like hundreds of years it didn't happen because of the way Israel existed between ancient times and modern times. But today, literally, there are places in Jerusalem where it's an expectation that you'll go walking up and down the street looking for people to say sorry to. And it's a really kind of powerful thing. Like, so, it's like if you said something wrong to someone and you, like, you've been in services for most of the day, you get out of service and you can pick one of these, like, they're fairly major non-highway streets that this happens on, and people will walk for like a couple of miles up and back, looking for opportunities to ask for forgiveness, which is a really kind of powerful thing. So that doesn't happen here. I mean, it's not a cultural expectation. I mean, the expectation is still that like someone does that kind of work on their own, but there isn't like this cultural like expectation that it happens like on Yom Kippur, and like because it's accessible because everyone thinks to do it. Anyway,
I think Sarah had a
yeah,
question.
yeah.
Oh, it wasn't really a question so much as I just had you were talking about Shabbat, and I just kind of had a core memory unlock. My mother spent in about 6 weeks before she died in a hospital in Toronto, Mount Sinai,
Mm-hmm.
which which we'd never had anyone spend any time in before. And there was I was 19, I guess. So that's 25 years ago now. Um, there was an elevator there. My
Mm.
father explained this to me. There was an elevator, and I can't remember all of the details, but it 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 didn't stop at every floor, or that it stopped at every floor automatically, so that on Shabbat people didn't have to push the buttons,
Yeah. So
because
there's
that was considered work.
Yeah. Well, so it's a yes. So the idea of work is kind of like a complicated thing. So in the Torah, there is a juxtaposition between the commandment of keeping Shabbat and the commandment to build the wilderness sanctuary, which sometimes is translated as tabernacle, but really they should have just translated as sanctuary. That would probably be more accurate. Because no one knows what the word tabernacle means, but but it means sanctuary. And so so because in the Torah these two things are side by side, the rabbis, when they were thinking about what it meant to keep Shabbat and what work was it talking about, it must mean any of the kind of steps that would have been required to build this wilderness sanctuary. And so one of the things that's prohibited is turning or setting a fire or lighting light, because that was one of the steps that was required in the completion of the building of the sanctuary. And so people don't drive on Shabbat, not because they had cars or anything, or even because like horses drawing a carriage would not be like, it's because that internal combustion engines create fire every time you press on the pedal. And so people have a prohibition against driving. And even if you don't technically light a fire by pressing a button, the fact that it imitates that by turning a light on is what we would call building a fence around the Torah. Yeah.
Yes, that's
And
how he
so,
explained it.
yeah,
Yeah.
so Shabbat elevators in Israel and in other places where there are observant Jewish populations will stop at every floor, so that the buildings are still accessible, but people don't have to violate Shabbat by doing it. So they just go up and down all day long.
And
Yeah.
there were other things too that I
Yeah.
can't
Well, and
remember now. It was a long time
most
ago.
people's ovens in your homes probably have a Shabbat setting that you've never used before. But because appliance manufacturers kind of know that they're gonna have, Jewish observant people, and it's like a necessary thing, they just kind of they just do it as like a thing, and that way they don't have to worry about like having specific Jewish ovens. But so yeah, so like even when we're renovating my house right now, and so I told the person at Jeff Lynch appliance store that I was the rabbi, and he was like, "Oh, do you need the Shabbat setting in the appliance?" Well, he said no, because we don't observe that particular that thing, but he was like, "Well, it's there anyway." So
So where is it? I'm curious, like,
it's usually in the settings, and people who are observant know what they're looking for. I honestly have never read through like a manual looking for it, but I mean, like if you buy a new oven, it's almost certainly there.
I'm gonna go look for it.
Yeah, if it usually will say it will, like if there's like a code or an abbreviation, it'll be just SHA or something like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank
Um,
you. Yeah.
yeah.
That just kind of brought back that memory about there was an elevator, there was something about the lights in the rooms too.
Yep.
And yeah,
Yeah,
it
yeah.
was and my father explained it all to me and I couldn't remember.
Yeah. So
Thank
I
you.
know, yeah. So I know like people who like for a variety of reasons will keep like like there's a particular kind of lantern that you don't actually turn on, but you will like push a particular like I guess a lens or something open, and the light will shine, like it's like a flashlight that's just on all the time, and all you have to do is like open like a section instead of like pressing it on, in case their power goes out, like, and and they need because they can't light a light and they can't turn on a flashlight, but they can open this like thing, and it will allow them to be able to like get around their houses. So they before every Shabbat they turn on one of these like battery operated lantern things, and they leave it closed, and if they need it they just open it up. There's lots of things that you have to think about when you are observant for Shabbat. or I should say traditionally observance for Shabbat, because I observe Shabbat every week. I just don't do it in that way.
I was going to ask, can you explain, this is a little off holiday topic, but could you explain the difference mainly between Orthodox and Reform?
Yeah, so the how do I do this in a nutshell? Okay, so the biggest difference is, so for 2000 years, Jewish tradition has been a combination of what's called the written law and the oral tradition. And the oral tradition today has mostly been written down. It was originally preserved by passing it down orally from generation to generation. But about 1300 years ago, the bulk of it was written down in today in what's called the Talmud. But for most of Jewish history, Judaism has existed as kind of a legal tradition. So it was a legal responsibility to do God's will. Both things that were written out in the Torah and a variety of things that came from interpreting, and again, which were part of this like very broad oral tradition. And so there was a point, there are a few kind of like factors that kind of contributed to the evolution of Reform Judaism. So we call ourselves Reform in the like ongoing sense, because we're not done. It is an ongoing. So we are not the Reformed church, or like in there is a Reformed church in like Protestant Christianity. We're not done yet. So we consider ourselves to be constantly evolving. So we left off the ed. So Reform Judaism looked at all of this like legalistic tradition, and said there are things that are to live within this tradition that modernity would challenge greatly. So the Reform movement, to kind of paint with broad strokes here, took the idea of all of this very legalistic tradition and said, well, we don't feel legally responsible for doing these things anymore, but we see all of these laws and traditions as being informative and are basically the creation of an ethical framework, and they inform how we live our lives, but we don't find ourselves to be under any sort of like legal obligation to fulfill things, that people have the ability to think for themselves and live within society, and there's going to always be barriers to kind of complete participation if we participate in society in general. And so they reframed the concept of what it means to be commanded, essentially. And so Orthodox Jews didn't ever go through that process. They are still very much commanded to do these things by God, and there's no ethics about it. It's because God said so. And there have been within the Orthodox world attempt to rethink about certain of these laws within an ethical framework, but it doesn't matter what the ethics are. If God says it, you're supposed to do it. So the best example that I have in terms of how to like put like a concrete example to this. So for me, like if an Orthodox Jew keeping kosher would never eat pork or shellfish under any circumstances. And if they ate any kind of meat, it would have to be slaughtered in a very particular way, under the guidance of a rabbi. And there are a variety of other rules about not being able to mix dairy products and meat products and all these other things. So for me, I look at that whole like construct as being kind of symbolic of elevating a natural human process to being something that is considered holy. And so rather than like doing what an Orthodox Jew would do and say, well, I need my meat slaughtered in a particular kind of way, which really only focuses on the death of the animal, my kind of ethical framework that I have created around this idea that the food I eat should be elevated, or the process of eating in general should be elevated to something more important than just being like a natural human condition. I make sure that if I buy meat, at least at the grocery store, that it has been ethically raised, because I think that the way the animal was treated while it was alive is, I know because I've read all sorts of other things and reviews that most of the animal slaughtering that's done today is actually on par from an ethical standpoint to how like the ancient Jewish system of like slaughtering is. So, and actually there are some arguments that even like at this point that the way that kosher animals are slaughtered probably don't even meet the like highest standard of ethics from today's standpoint. But that's a different conversation. But so how the animal is treated and how the workers who raise the animals are treated and all these other things that kind of go into it, to me, become an important part of like what I think about when I eat. And so that's what I mean when I say we've translated this very legalistic structure into like an ethical framework, if that makes sense. So that's the biggest difference between Orthodox and Reform, and we could spend a lot more hours talking about the like nuance.
That's great though. And really, I mean, that's a practice that I think resonates with anybody, regardless of if they think of something that is perhaps a religious tradition. Like I think of communion for Christians because there's some people that there's a certain way, a certain process of preparing the Eucharist, presenting and serving the Eucharist, and then there's others that it's not even considered a sacrament. It is definitely representative of something, but not there's just so much around that, and that again, that's one of those other whole night conversations and stuff.
Yeah.
But I love that. I love that. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah. So Rosh Hashanah. So I want to. Trying to figure out like what's the best way to kind of just go a little bit deeper into it. So I gave you a little background on like the biblical understanding of Rosh Hashanah and like and the complicatedness of like a little bit of insight into the complicatedness of the calendar. There's actually 4 different New Years in Jewish tradition, and each of them served a different purpose. So Rosh Hashanah, again, is the new year for the purpose of the calendar, and it's also identified in rabbinic tradition as like the birthday of the world. So if you think about what time of year did God create the universe, the rabbis in Jewish tradition say this time of year. And so the birthday of so this new year, even though it's not the first day of the calendar, is the birthday of the world. And so in rabbinic tradition, the day, in addition to be called Rosh Hashanah, is also called Hayom Harat Olam, which actually is a triple entendre. It's a phrase that means 3 different things simultaneously. And a lot of people, so again, and I'm going to say something that could take years to unpack, but so Hebrew is a complicated language, and every single Hebrew word means more than one thing, and sometimes it means a lot more than one thing. And when you have a phrase of words collectively that all mean more than one thing, you could literally sometimes have like 50 different meanings per sentence. So here's my controversial statement. The Bible, according to Jewish tradition, doesn't inherently mean anything. It actually means a lot of different things simultaneously. And when you read the Bible in translation, you are actually missing quite a bit of information. So Jews, that's one of the reasons why Jews typically don't like use biblical English translations, because, and if anyone tells a Jewish person that the Bible says this, well, at least if someone tells me that the Bible says this, then I typically say, yeah, and because it also says a lot of other things in the very same sentence. So when you read the Bible in translation, when you're reading it not in Hebrew, you are missing a significant portion of context and like an actual like cultural tradition and all sorts of other things. Tracy, do you have a question?
Yes. Now,
Yeah.
I know this really might sound stupid, but did you know that before? I mean, did you know that when you were growing up that this didn't mean anything, but it meant everything?
Well,
What
it does
did
mean everything, but it
Oh,
does
I
mean a lot of
but it
things.
could mean a
So,
lot of things. Okay.
I
Did you
mean,
know that?
I wouldn't have been able to frame it that way, but like, I mean, so I'll tell you, like, the source of sermon writing actually comes from the fact that every Hebrew word means more than one thing, and so it invites interpretation. And so, like, the oldest Jewish sermons were essentially like wordplay, like figuring out figuring out meaning within like cultural context and all sorts of other things. My favorite example of like things that like shock people when I say it is if I ask the question, what made Joseph's relationship to his father special, or what was the symbol of that relationship? People say, what would you say? What did Joseph have that Jacob gave him that made their relationship special? Most people answer that question by saying a coat of many colors.
Yeah, right.
That's not what it says in the Bible. That's what it says in a lot of translations of the Bible. But in the Torah, the Hebrew phrase is katonet pasim. Jacob gave Joseph this katonet pasim. A katonet is an outer garment, and pas is an undefined word. Nobody really knows what pasim means, but the closest thing that we've got, like in a general Hebrew context, is your wrist. And so, but that doesn't make any sense to say a coat with wrists. But so a coat with sleeves does make sense, because if you were living in the desert, you wouldn't want to wear a coat that would be too hot, but you also would want something to protect you from the sun. And so a lightweight coat that like covered you during the hot portion of the day and also kept you warm in the night when it got a little bit chilly, that would have been a special gift. So how did we get from there to coat of many colors? Well, in the 11th century, there was a French rabbi named Rashi. Well, his name was Rabbi Shlomo ben Yitzchak, but if you were anybody in the rabbinic world in the Middle Ages, you were not known by your name, you were known by your acronym. And so Rashi was his acronym. Rabbi is the R sound. Sh is Shlomo, and the E at the end is for Yitzchak. So in any case, so Rashi said, because he was living in France in the 1100s, he said, well, a coat with sleeves doesn't make anyone special. What can I use as like my cultural reference to show people that this was like an important gift? And so he like references like what he considered to be like royal garments, and well, a striped garment would have been a lot fancier, and it would have had multiple colors, which also would have been a lot fancier. And so literally, when you see a translation of the Bible that says that Joseph had a coat of many colors, what you are actually reading is an interpretation of an interpretation from a medieval French context. And because that he was the first person really to kind of come up with that idea historically. So Rosh Hashanah, one of the things that Rosh Hashanah is called is Hayom Harat Olam. So Hayom Harat Olam literally means the day of the birth of the world. That's day number, or idea number one wrapped up in this context is this is the world's birthday. Yom Harat Olam also means like this. This is Judgment Day. So so Rosh Hashanah is also known as the Day of Judgment. The day when God starts to take account of all of our actions, and we're also supposed to do the same thing on our own. And then the third is probably the most complicated, but it actually comes from a phrase in the book of Jeremiah where it means today is pregnant with eternity. So, which means today is the day that we're supposed to think about all of the possibilities that lay before us. It's a really powerful, so again, it's three meanings wrapped up into this one phrase, all that kind of tell you what Rosh Hashanah is. So Rosh Hashanah is a celebration of the birthday of the world, and in that respect is when we change. So we just started the year 5784, even though we're in the 7th month of the year. And because we're commemorating the birthday of the world. And and it is also the beginning of this period of judgment, the day of judgment, and it is also again supposed to remind us of all of the world, the possibilities that lie before us, and that really that the possibilities that lie before us are in some sense kind of infinite. Um, so that's Rosh Hashanah. So there are a few kind of cultural things about Rosh Hashanah. So both, again, obviously the food the pomegranate seeds and the apples and honey are only things that you would really do on Rosh Hashanah, because again, Yom Kippur is a fast day, so there aren't typically foods associated with Yom Kippur. But one of the other things which I didn't tell you to, or that I didn't tell Michelle to have you get, would have been a fish head, or if you lived in like North Africa or the Middle East, a goat head. So there is yeah. I didn't want to say that. So, but when I lived in Israel, I saw a goat head at one Rosh Hashanah dinner that I went to. Um, so the idea comes from, again, a biblical idea that you should strive to be like the head and not the tail, meaning, um, that you should act up front and not have to be a follower. Like, you should act on your own behalf and shouldn't act because someone else compelled you to, or um, that your actions should be one, yeah, or that are just you're forward thinking kind of. So people literally would either eat like the head of a goat or the head of a fish, symbolically, um, to represent this like aphorism saying. So pomegranate seeds. So why pomegranate seeds? So there is a Jewish idea that the number of seeds within a pomegranate is the same as the number of mitzvahs or commandments that God has given to the Jewish people. That number is 613, although I can tell you, that if you were to look through the Torah and try and pick out all of the commandments, you would likely come up with a different number. And if you read through rabbinic tradition, different rabbis come up with different examples of the 613. So if you were to add all of the rabbinic understandings of what the 613 commandments are, you would have a lot more than that, because the rabbis didn't write the same things.
And
um,
the pomegranates have different seeds too, I bet.
so yeah, you're putting too much thought in it now. But so the basic idea was that because there's a lot of seeds in a pomegranate, it's a reminder that there's a lot of obligations that we have as Jews, and it may or may not be 613 in seeds in a pomegranate, but that's what it's supposed to represent. And apples actually are more complicated. So, because there were no apples in the ancient Middle East. Like, I don't know if anyone knows the origin story of apples, but apples come from like northeastern Europe originally, and they ended up spreading around the world for a variety of reasons. But in any case, so I will also say, maybe somewhat controversially, the fruit that Adam and Eve ate in the Garden of Eden was also not an apple. There was never a point in Jewish tradition where it has ever been considered an apple. Some people think it's a date. Some people think it might be a citron or like a lemon, um, but never an apple. Or maybe fig. Anyway, so why apples? So again, apples are somewhat of a newish fruit to the Middle East, but the majority of apples that people who kind of created this tradition encountered would have been red. And what color is the inside of an apple? Closer to white. And so, have you all heard of the word Kabbalah before, or like, so Kabbalah really means to receive, but it refers to a particular subset of Jewish tradition that is very mystical, and incredibly complicated. And people who do things and call it Kabbalah, like Madonna or Britney Spears, they're not actually doing Kabbalah. They think they are, because there are people who take advantage of them, but they're not actually practicing Kabbalah. So Kabbalah is actually quite a complicated system of thinking that requires a very deep understanding of the multifacetedness of the Hebrew language. And so if you don't understand Hebrew, you really can't like do Kabbalah. Um, but anyway, the Kabbalists have a pretty interesting framework of thinking about God, and one of the ways that they try and I guess create categories about God is or thinking about God is through what they call the 10 sfirot. So some of you may have seen this, like it's almost look kind of like a map. It's got 10 dots on it, and they're all the dots are connected to each other. Those 10 points on the map represent 10 kind of basic characteristics of divine presence in the universe. So like compassion and justice and understanding and wisdom and so at the top is what's called Keter, like God's royal like sovereign represents like God as sovereign of the universe. At the bottom is what's called Shekhinah, which means the divine presence that dwells among human beings. But anyway, so opposite sides of this map are we've already talked about justice is Din, and on the other side is Rachamim or compassion, and so also associated with each of these characteristics are colors. So what's the color associated with divine justice is red. The color associated with divine mercy is white. So in order to find divine mercy, you stand in judgment before God. And so when you eat an apple on Rosh Hashanah, what you're actually doing is like consuming the process of finding divine mercy. You have to get through the peel. You have to get through that. You have to stand in judgment before God. You have to break through the red in order to get to the white, which is, again, symbolic of this process. And then to ensure that this process goes sweetly for you, you dip the apple in honey. But that's most, I would venture to say that 90% of Jews don't know what I just told you because it's a fun thing and you just do it. No one actually thinks about why, other than to say that we hope for people to have a sweet new year, and so you eat two sweet things together, an apple and honey. But that's actually where the tradition comes from. So, yeah. So, anyone have any questions so far, or yeah?
Well, I don't want to take over, but if we have time before we leave tonight, would you tell us about your own story on how and when you knew you wanted to be a rabbi?
Yeah, well, that's a quick story. So, I grew up in Norfolk, Virginia. My dad was in the Navy, and so my dad was gone probably half of my childhood because we never left Norfolk. My mom had her own career, and she was the director of a nonprofit organization that found housing and employment for people with disabilities. So we stayed in Norfolk, and my dad would get deployed to all over around the world and would always be restationed in Norfolk when he got back. So he was gone like 6 months at a time, and he would be home for 6 months. But anyway, so I kind of adopted my rabbi as like my father figure when my dad was away. We went to services every week, every Friday night. And so when it was my 4th birthday, I invited my rabbi to my birthday party, and he told me in advance that he couldn't come because my birthday was at the same time as a conference that he was supposed to go to. And I remember, so at this party, this is a funny aside, but my mom, like I had like a clown perform at my birthday parties when I was like a little kid. I learned later in life, like when I was maybe in college, that actually the guy who was performing as a clown in my house was also a retired rabbi. As a retired rabbi, what do you do? Well, this person, he became a clown for children's birthday parties. So, in any case, maybe I'll do that one day. So on the day of my party, like while the clown is performing and there's all these kids running around, like my phone rings and it's my rabbi. He's called, and my rabbi could not sing, but my favorite thing to do with him was to sing one particular song, which is called Vishamru, which is actually a poem that comes from the Torah about the importance of keeping Shabbat. So the song actually, as I learned more about Jewish music as a rabbi, like I learned that this song was actually like an 18th century like drinking song, like a bar song that German Jews used in temple, just as like the source of a melody. So the song actually sounds like a German drinking song, but it sounds like this: Vishamru b'nei Yisrael et hashabat la'asot et hashabat ledorotam berit olam. So that was my favorite song when I was a kid. And he would, whenever we would see each other, it didn't matter where it was, like we would sing that. So anyway, he called and sang me that song for my birthday, and I told my mom for the first time after that phone call that I wanted to be a rabbi. And then I don't know if it's because I'm stubborn or what, but I just never changed my mind. And obviously, I didn't know what being a rabbi really meant as a 4-year-old, other than to sing songs with people you like. And so, but as I figured it out and like learned like what the complexity of this position includes, nothing scared me off. Actually, the thing that was most terrifying at a certain point was the idea that I would be doing what I'm doing now, which is like speaking in front of other people. But other than that, I liked the idea of like being a teacher, and I really like all of the learning, and I like the counseling, and I like being with people like during important moments in their lives. And so that's my story.
Yay, thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah, so let's see. I'm trying to think if there's like something to give you related to Yom Kippur other than that it's a fast day. So yeah, so just like the other things I've talked about, like Yom Kippur is a day full of tension also. So the days collectively, so the high holidays, like, so we've mentioned Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur means Day of Atonement, and Yom Kippur, unlike Rosh Hashanah, is mentioned by name in the Torah. And there are ancient traditions that we don't do anymore. So one of the ancient traditions was to take 2 goats. This is in the book of Leviticus described. One of the goats was used as an offering of redemption for the entire people of Israel. And the other goat, all of the sins from the people were like magically transferred to this goat. And the goat was sent into the wilderness to depending on like who you ask, the name of the thing of whatever was called Azazel, and Azazel in Hebrew is like the name of an ancient like demon creature. So I mean, nobody translates it that way today. They usually just kind of leave it as Azazel, but like we don't really have a good understanding of like what Azazel. I mean, an Ez in Hebrew is a goat. So it was the goat demon, like in the ancient world. So you send your sins to the goat demon through another goat. Like it was basically like, take these away from us. But in reality, actually, like what was described in rabbinic tradition is that there would be a person who would follow this goat and then make sure that the goat was like slaughtered or sacrificed in an appropriate way like later outside of the community, so it wouldn't wander back. But in any case, today, like those kinds of rituals that were included in ancient tradition, we read them as a part of our liturgy, as opposed to, obviously, like nobody is slaughtering goats in Jewish tradition anymore, or at least not for that kind of ritual purpose. So there are other traditions kind of tied to Yom Kippur also. But in the Talmud, like in this ancient collection of like writings about the way we're supposed to think about all these different traditions, Yom Kippur is simultaneously like the most like awesome day where we're supposed to, I mean, so there's a Hebrew word called yirah, which simultaneously means fear and awe. So So the phrase Yirat Adonai means simultaneously to be fearful of God and also to be in awe of God. And it's also, but it is when we say Yerushalayim, that word Yira, Shalom, is Shalom means peace, but it also means complete. So Jerusalem is the city of complete awe. That's what it's supposed to mean. Or if you're reading it the other way, complete fear. So most people tend to think that we should be using the word, at least when we talk about God, or some people find themselves in a place of fear, but that's not the intention. The intention is to be in awe of God, to be in awe of the world around us. One of my favorite theologians, his name is Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, and he wrote about a concept called radical amazement, which I think is a really kind of profound idea. What he writes essentially is that human beings, when they're born and when they're children, don't have the kind of cynicism about the things that they see around them. Like everything is awesome because it's new, and we have the ability to like look at things and not just kind of like throw it into the processor. Like we're really like seeing everything for kind of what it is and being in amazement. And so Heschel's like concept of radical amazement is basically, as an adult, as being able to like recapture that fascination and curiosity that children have that we lose somewhere along the line in becoming adults. But he said, but that kind of radical amazement is one way of like thinking about God. Like God, if God is the creator of everything, then or even if you don't believe that God is the creator of everything, but like that there is a source in the universe that kind of coordinated all of this like beauty that surrounds us, that we have a human responsibility to like, stop and actually acknowledge the craziness of all of that every once in a while. So Yom Kippur simultaneously is the day where that access to fear and awe is supposed to be like in the forefront, and it's also simultaneously supposed to be like the happiest day of the year, because it's the day, in theory, if we've like done the process of like teshuvah, of like healing and of repair and self-reflection that we were supposed to do for not only the 10 days of awe, but we were actually supposed to start in the full month ahead of Rosh Hashanah, that this is the day where, so I also said, so cheshbon nefesh means like soul accounting, but it also means like clean slate. So it's the day where you have a clean slate, where everything in front of you is like, it's one of the metaphors that is used regularly in Rosh Hashanah, but specifically on Yom Kippur, is the idea of the book of life. Sefer Chaim, the book of life, that God records everything that we do. And so that's part of where the accounting bit comes in. But the page that we are on starts on Yom Kippur. So it's a blank page. Your page for the year is completely blank. There's nothing on it. And so we should be profoundly joyful that's happening. And actually so much so that in the Talmud, in this ancient collection of rabbinic writings, they compare the joy that someone experiences on or that should experience on Yom Kippur, to the joy that you would experience on the day of your engagement, like when you're getting married. Like that's how profound of an experience it's supposed to be. So yeah, so Yom Kippur, they're both very complicated days, but again, it is almost entirely about finding your place within that like tension between these ideas. I guess another really interesting thing that I sometimes think about. So Yom Kippur, so the Day of Atonement, it means atonement, but Kippur also like, so it kind of means like to fix or repair also. So part of this acknowledgement of especially things that we've done wrong in our prayers, none of the prayers that are written about things that we do that are wrong are written in the singular. All of the prayers that we say within the context of community on Yom Kippur are all written in the plural because one of the most important ideas in Jewish tradition is taking responsibility not only for your own actions, but being responsible for the actions of members of your community. Because if somebody does something as a part of the Jewish community, the idea is that we have created the circumstances, one way or another, by which they made the decision to act in that way. So there is a very heavy sense of communal responsibility. So we don't say, Chatani lefanecha, that I have sinned before you. We say Chatanu lefanecha, we have sinned before you. So all of it's written in a collective sense. So it's very community heavy, even though in theory, when you say that, you're supposed to feel the weight of it personally. You're not actually, it also provides a framework for someone who may have actually done something really wrong to not feel alone in those moments. So, in any case, so there are lots of really like heavy, heavy pieces to the day. But again, the day is also supposed to be a day of relief of all of these things.
You know, it's interesting that the holiday does have so much reflection to it, because in so many other religious traditions, there may be celebration, but doesn't seem to be as much reflection in terms of a holiday. You know, I think we have reflection that we do individually, or maybe just with our calendar year, you know, our New Year's in January, and looking back and thinking forward. But as a religious tradition, I'm not familiar with that being such a formal thing in other religious practices. Are you? Is that uniquely Jewish?
Well, I don't know if it's uniquely, well, it's so funny. So, I'll tell you something interesting. So there is it's not modern, but it's the formalization of a particular like way of thinking in Jewish tradition is called Musar. So Musar is translated in a variety of ways, but it's typically translated as like Jewish ethics. But it's not. It's also kind of like the Jewish version of like self-help or character reform, or like there's a variety of ways of kind of looking at it. But the most famous book has the same title as a phrase I've already used a couple of times. It's called Cheshbon Nefesh, which means, again, soul accounting. And the purpose of the book is for people to have a formal process, like it's actually a defined process of going not just on the high holidays, but throughout the year, of being able to be consciously aware of modifying our behavior in such a way that gets us to a more ideal sense of ourselves. And so what is interesting, or I think it's interesting, is actually is that the book was almost, I mean, I wouldn't say it was plagiarized, but it was certainly ripped off from Ben Franklin. So the structure that's described in this book is taken almost directly from Ben Franklin. Ben Franklin's autobiography has a chapter on basically like self awareness, and it contains literally a chart where he wrote down 13 character traits that he thought every human should like be like working to improve. And Rabbi Menachem Mendel of Satanov, like some small town in Poland, somehow got a hold of a copy of Ben Franklin's autobiography in God knows what language, and found this chart and basically said, like, this is profound information, and he added a very Jewish spin to it, and so wrote his book in Hebrew. But like there's even like a story about like a particular bird and snake somewhere in America. Like, I mean, it's very clear that this person had never been to America. And so where did he get the story from? He had to have gotten it from Ben Franklin. So in any case, so I would say that the process is certainly not unique to Jewish tradition, but maybe in terms of like connecting the process to a holiday, which is, I guess, what the question that you had was, maybe that's unique. I don't know enough about other traditions spectrum of holidays to know to know all of that. Um, I mean, I don't think of Christmas or Easter as being particularly self-reflective. I mean, I have pretty good understanding about what those holidays are about. But the truth is most Jewish holidays have a sense of the awareness of like the circumstance that led to the holiday. And so like even like Passover is as a holiday, like we have, again, just like everything else in Jewish tradition, we have kind of like a written liturgy for it. But like the centerpiece of the holiday is a Seder, which is means order, but um, the one of the major points of the holiday is to reflect on what freedom means, and how we've gotten to our point of freedom currently, and what we can do as individuals and as a society to basically ensure freedom for all people in the world. Like that's so I mean the days of awe are specifically thinking about like kind of a soul searching kind of thing, but there are certainly other places in the Jewish calendar that force us to think about how our actions and behavior influence people around us.
Well, thank you so much. Does anybody have any questions for Sam?
Oh, hold on. So, Robert and Desiree, I sent me a message. Rosh Hashanah is the beginning, and Yom Kippur is the end. Yeah. So the whole collection of holidays are called the Yamim Noraim, which means the days of awe. So or the awesome days, or the days of fear, or however. I mean, like it kind of is all inclusive in that. Most people call them the days of awe as opposed to the days of fear. Um, but it's so actually so again in the complicatedness of everything. So the days actually start the days of awe. You could argue that there are a variety of options for when people consider the beginning. So some people actually consider the beginning of the days of awe to be the first of the month of Elul, and I think I said already once that there are actually 4 New Years in the Jewish calendar. The first New Year, the actual like beginning of the calendar, is the first of Nisan. Nisan is the month when Passover takes place, so that's actually the springtime New Year, and it's the first month of the Hebrew calendar. Then you have a new year, which actually begins in the middle of the month. So a new year called Tisha B'Av, or Tu B'Shvat. Sorry, Tu B'Shvat. Tu B'Shvat is the birthday of the trees. So it's like Jewish Earth Day, kind of. But ritually speaking, in ancient times, when people needed to keep track of how many years your orchard was around before you could eat your fruit, you weren't allowed to eat fruit until the 4th year of harvest, or for a particular tree. And rather than keeping track of when every single tree was planted, the rabbis codified a day where you could just have like every tree on your property like changes year. And so that's the second New Year. But again, it's the 15th day of the month of Shvat. And then the first of Elul, which is the month directly before Rosh Hashanah. The first of Elul was the same concept, but for ritual like consumption of animals. So if an animal was going to be offered as a sacrifice, it couldn't be offered until a particular year of its life. And so the first of Elul was the birthday collectively for your herds and flocks and things like that. And the first of Elul has also, in like a modern tradition, become the day when people begin this process of like soul searching, and so whereas the main day, like the thing that is described in the Torah, is blowing the shofar on Rosh Hashanah. One thing that some people do is actually to blow the shofar every day for the entire month of Elul. Not as complicated or as many times, but they actually participate. And there have become all sorts of other like there are other ideas behind that. So one of my favorite is so if you look at Jewish tradition, they're especially like from an anthropological lens, like asking like why do we actually do some things, like there's actually a lot of rituals that relate to superstition. So So in Hebrew, there is a concept of what's called Hasatan, which is very different than I would say in generally speaking from like what a Christian concept of Satan is. But Hasatan in Hebrew, in Jewish tradition, is a prosecuting attorney on behalf of God. So Satan's job is to make it so that if we've done something wrong, that God's justice finds us. And um, so when is Satan supposed to show up to court? When he hears the shofar sound. And so if you blow the shofar for the entire month before, you're going to confuse Satan, and maybe he won't show up on the right day. So there are some people who I mean, the shofar also like symbolizes other things, but that is within the context of Jewish tradition. One of the ways that people like think about what shofar means is the shofar um, is used as a tool to confuse God's prosecuting attorney. Um, so another way that people kind of conceptualize the shofar is being an alarm clock. So our time has come to be thoughtful in this particular way, and so it's almost like a meditative thing. Like you hear the sound and you think it's time to turn inward. Um, and there are just a variety of other things. But so all that is to say, some people believe that the beginning of the days of awe are the first of Elul, and so for that whole month leading up to the first of Tishrei, which is the very next month, um, and then going all the way to Yom Kippur. Like some people would end the high holidays there, but then 5 days after Yom Kippur, there's a holiday called Sukkot, which we haven't talked about at all yet. But Sukkot is literally starts 5 days after Yom Kippur, and it's the major fall harvest festival. It's actually Sukkot is how the pilgrims made up Thanksgiving. So Thanksgiving is like directly related to their like biblical understanding of the 7-day holiday of Sukkot. So Sukkot is 7 days at least. Again, in the Reform world, we celebrate 7 days. Anyone who lives outside of Israel and is not Reform celebrates for 8 days. And if you live in Israel, you celebrate for 7 days. But Sukkot it's a harvest festival. It's also a festival where we're supposed to think about the kind of limits of human possession. So like you're supposed to build a temporary dwelling structure and do as many things as possible in it, including if you're able to eat and sleep in it, like for the whole week. So I typically build my sukkah on my back porch, and we have, when it's not raining, my daughter, or my oldest daughter, and I have slept outside a few times. Although actually because Sukkot starts with the full moon, it can be difficult to actually sleep outside because it's so bright. Um, but we've also been woken up by owls in my backyard before, and so that's, there's different reasons why we just don't do it all the time for Sukkot, but we try and do it a couple of times where we actually sleep outside on my back porch for, and again, to eat all of your meals outside. And it's a celebration of the bounty of the season, but it's also and again, as a reflective process, a holiday that reminds us that our physical possessions are only temporary.
Mhm. Oh, that's lovely. That is always a good reminder, and I think we need that a lot in America. When we stay indoors too much. Well, Sam, thank you so much for
Yeah.
being with us tonight. This was wonderful. My head is spinning. I've got a page full of notes, and
I mean, I'm happy I love teaching about obviously about holidays and things. And what I've told you, I mean, so our services were short. Like our service itself lasted over 2 hours this morning, or not this morning, yesterday morning. So I mean, if you were actually to dive into like the liturgy, or to dive into like other pieces of like kind of historical concepts of the holiday, you could teach a full like semester's worth of a college class on the high holidays, because it's very
wow.
complex. But so I think we did a pretty good job of
I
covering.
think you did a great job. You definitely, the hour and a half flew by. Thank you so much. You're so knowledgeable. I'm going to put you on the spot and ask you if you would agree to be kind of a consultant for Ecclesia. And we have a
Sure.
theology team,
Okay.
and we want to round it out more. So it'd be great to have a rabbi on that as a resource that we could call and from time to time. I promise we won't take advantage of you.
And you're so joyful.
Well,
You know, I love your joy.
Yeah, yeah,
thank you.
yeah, I love
Yeah.
it.
Well,
Um,
I'm happy to do that.
great, thank you. Well, I am in radical amazement after
Good.
tonight. So this is wonderful. And it's just a really good, it's always a good time, regardless of the time of year. But now, because I understand this holiday better, and this is always a crazy busy time of year for people heading it, school has started and it's just kind of that time of year where it feels like it is a new year in a lot of ways, just our culture. And it's a good time to just reflect like you do. So I may start adopting some of that practice myself, just because it's a great time to do it. So, and our friend Ranu Sarmita Misra, who's on the call with us, she was a guest speaker 2.5 years ago for Hinduism, and shared some of her stories of growing up and ushering in the day and ushering out the day, focused first and solely on God. And so those practices have really stuck with me. So I really appreciate this. It's just delightful to learn more about it.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I appreciate
I'll have to chime in. When you blew the horn, I was like, where's my mother? Because we have a similar tradition of calling in, well, it's more meditative practice and also time of day. That's what it's for. But it's a conch shell,
Yeah.
because we're not too much into the animal product, so to speak, just
Yeah.
from that faith-based. But the conch shell, again, is so important for us. And when you blew it, I was like, oh, I was completely back in time. And thank you for doing that. Lots of similarities I notice with obviously the Jewish culture and Hindu culture have a lot of similarities, because they're both ancient. They're of the senses, or of what's around us and the people. I think where we go into Michelle's questions, we do have a lot of depth of in our culture and even our religion, I guess you want to call it, is the astrological calendar is deeply in sync with our so-called observances and holidays. So
There is
that's the science. That's known science within the Hindu culture. That's just something that they really really delved into. So
yeah.
thank
So
you.
I will say Jewish tradition has a pretty deep astrological segment to it also. Like there's a whole section of tractate, what's called brachot, which is the section of blessings that deal with the interpretation of dreams, but also like the reading of constellations. And it is, I mean, that's some an area that I probably don't know as much about, but it is very interesting, and there's quite a bit of that in Jewish tradition as well. Even like if you go to Israel, they're in one of the oldest synagogues, um, I think in Caesarea, like it's one of the cities in the north. There is a mosaic from the Roman period, which is the Hebrew astrological signs on the floor of a synagogue. So it is yeah, that I have kind of thought about trying to learn more about that, but have not made time yet.
That's always the thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
Well, could you close us with a prayer that you could sing?
Yeah, hold on. I have a perfect one. Give me. Oh, did my phone die? Hold on, I can do it on my
Of course, right.
phone.
I had pulled up a high holiday mashup by a group called 613 on YouTube, but
Oh
I
yeah,
think
that's
hearing
good.
you sing closely would be much better anyway.
Yeah. So hold on. I actually have a really good thing, and I think I know where it is. Yom Kippur afternoon service. Um, I think that's where it is. Um, maybe that's where it is. If I can't find it in a second, I will look it on my phone. Or my phone is dead. Hold on, I have a different idea.
While Sam's looking, does anybody have any thoughts of what jumped out at you and what really resonated with you, perhaps even for your own looking at the year ahead? Gotta think about it.
It definitely deeply resonated. Thank you for sharing. The year ahead part was beautiful, to have that pause and to create that next page to turn. What does New Year mean? I think this is something that was very reflective.
Well, thank you.
Well,
And to remind me to be in awe
Yeah.
every day.
All right.
Rabbi, when you did rock and roll,
Yeah.
did you play or just sing?
I played actually. So I played in a punk band in high school.
Yeah.
And I played bass guitar.
Of course
But
you
I
did.
also now I play guitar. I haven't played bass guitar in a very long time.
No.
Um, but I used to. Because I didn't own a bass guitar. And I actually joined my high school's jazz band, and told them I played bass already, even though I didn't. And
Nice.
I rented the bass for $25 for the year, and yeah, they let me borrow it, and I used it in this punk rock band. Um,
That's
um,
great.
yeah. Oh, I
And
found a link to the song that I want to sing. So why I'm having trouble finding it is because I know it's a piece it's only written in my Reform Machzor, in my Reform prayer book. It is kind of a mashup of different things, but I sing it with the choir, but I can't always remember all of the words if I'm not looking at them, which is like one of the problems with my memory is I don't remember words very well in order. Um,
You remembered a lot of words tonight.
yeah, but if you ask me to say them in the same order again, I wouldn't be able to do it. um, oh man, where is it? Hold on, see if I can search it. Okay, Mom. The song is called Kerachem Av, and I found like a place where I could like quickly see the music. I just really want the words, but it's only in, like I said, in this prayer book in this particular way. There it is. Maybe it will let me see it. Please let me see it. No, it just sends me back to. Here it is. Kerachem av al banim, recham Adonai al yireav, ki chigvo hashamayim al haaretz, gavar chasdo al yireav. Which means, may your compassion for us, for your children, be like the compassion of a loving parent. Adonai, we are in awe of you. You have created the heavens and the earth, and everything that you do is through acts of loving kindness for your creation.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm happy to
It's
happy to
a
be here.
delightful and surprising in some ways. I loved all the stories. Thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure. I hope y'all have a good night and a good new year.